Okay, so hi, Peter. How are you doing?
Hi, Duncan. I'm doing great. Thanks for
Great.
getting it together.
Yeah, no problem. Well, you were the first person to talk at our AI dinner a couple of months ago now, and great night it was. So, what I'd like to do with this AI dinner community group that we've got on Facebook is introduce you and just ask you a couple of questions. First of all, give us a little bit of an introduction. Who are you, and where are you from, and all that fun stuff.
Yes, thank you. So, my name's Peter Scott, and I'm originally from the UK, Essex lad, and grew up there, went to Cambridge, and right after that moved to the USA, worked for NASA at the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena for nearly 20 years, and then moved to Canada and continued working for them as a remote contractor. So, I have three passports now and three citizenships, which is kind of advantageous. Pass those on to my children. Having children meant a new perspective on things, and I became more interested in alternatives, alternative careers to pure technology, such as coaching, and got certified in that. And then I looked at the blending of those, and I realized there was something in the intersection of the technology and the human development world that was the issue of what's happening with the exponential growth of technology, particularly artificial intelligence, and that's something that is so important. It moved me to write a book.
Okay, so you are basically a rocket scientist working with NASA.
Yes.
Okay. So, what I'd like you to do now is just for those members of the group that are trying to get on top of this, in a nutshell, what is artificial intelligence?
Yeah, well, that's something where there's so many different definitions. So whatever I say, someone else is going to have a different definition of, and it's kind of like this Rorschach test, an ink blot thing. Whatever you look at it and you think you see there, that's what it is for you. And some people see a butterfly, some people see an axe murderer, and I was thinking the other day that AI is kind of like science fiction in one sense, because science fiction is stuff that hasn't happened yet. And artificial intelligence, one definition that was given is it's that which we don't know how to do yet, because as soon as we do know how to do it, like win chess games, then people say, well, that's not really artificial intelligence. We thought it was going to be, but now we realize it's just a rule-based system, or it's machine learning, or something like that. Now, some people are happy to call machine learning artificial intelligence because otherwise they have no marketing plan, and that's a good that's a good approach. That's a good definition these days, just to say that it's at the forefront of what we can figure out in computers, in the way of things that we would normally have associated with being the province of a human being, someone making complex decisions. People draw that line in different places. Some people call statistical methods artificial intelligence, things that are really just doing, linear regression or something a little more advanced, perhaps, but still just straight statistics. Other people, and I prefer to use that for things where you can't write down just straight formulas for what you're doing. It takes something that's a bit more impenetrable as a process for deciding that.
Okay, so let me therefore try to. I think that what I'm trying. Let's try to boil this down. So let's imagine that I am a manufacturer, and I am running an organization with 20 people, and I've got an office here of 6 or 7 people. I do some marketing, I do a lot of manufacturing. How on earth is AI going to help me? Do I need to really look at this stuff? Is it going to be important? Or is it just hairy fairy stuff that people are talking about now that's going to go away in a couple of years? What's going to be the benefit to me to look at it?
Well, we're certainly in a hype cycle at the moment that may or may not be justified. And when something's growing exponentially, you don't know if it's going to fall off a cliff right away or if it's going to keep going up for another 20 years. But it's not going away. How you could use it in that size business really depends on whether it's a product-based business or a service-based business.
Yeah, let's say it's products. Yeah.
One thing you should ask yourself is, even if you can't see the connection between artificial intelligence and this business, is what are your competitors going to be doing with it? Because if you're in the product business, then who's your competition, and what can they do if they can leverage scale? Like if you're a greengrocer and you're going up against Asda, then your future might not be that bright if they figure out how to use AI to get encroach upon what you thought was your niche.
Okay. Yeah.
Because they may be able to get fruit and vegetables to market faster and erode your lead in freshness, or they may figure out how to serve local markets. So now they get the locavores and all of these things that would take a lot of processing power for a nationwide retailer, because it would mean replicating all these little greengrocers across the country, and their specialized business. But then now that's not an issue, that's not a problem.
Okay, so therefore looking at competitors, see what they're using AI for, and then looking to see whether or not there's anything there for me. Okay, so whenever I'm talking to people about artificial intelligence, and especially trying to come up with some kind of a yes, it does exist, or no, it doesn't exist argument, people often talk about consciousness. Consciousness creeps into the conversation. Oh, computers are going to take over the world, and they're going to be telling us what to do. And what I think is clear from the people that I talk to is that potentially is decades away. That is decades away. We're nowhere near consciousness. It's just not what we're talking about at the moment. Is that right?
I don't think anyone knows. Certainly there's a consensus that we're decades away. I think the average answer is maybe 2 decades away at this point, 25 years. But I think the more interesting question for everyone to start asking at this point is, what are we talking about when we say consciousness? And what's a functional definition? Now, up until this point, arguing about that would have been something that would have been fun to do at midnight in a college dorm, and maybe if you were taking philosophy 101, but otherwise it's not going to get you anywhere. But now that's different, because all of the efforts in artificial general intelligence are now attacking this question of what is consciousness. And it's one of those words we use a lot, which no one can pin down in the slightest, that in any way that I find useful, because as a computer scientist, to talk about something, you have to find a way of formalizing a description of it. And it could be that consciousness is something that doesn't exist. It's like negative space. The triangle that's defined by those little Pac-Man circles around it, where we think there's a triangle there, but it's really just negative space. What if it's a phenomenon that is simply defined by what surrounds it, and all this time we've been talking about something that that is really like chasing shadows on the walls, to quote Plato. And what if the functions that we attribute to consciousness could be achieved by cheating? Like I was saying earlier, we thought it would take artificial intelligence to win chess games, and then and there was a quote from I think it was Douglas Hofstadter said that when Deep Blue won the World Chess Championship, he said, "My God, I used to think that playing chess required thinking. Now I realize it doesn't." And perhaps something of a slight to Garry Kasparov, but the point is that excuse me, we can do a lot of things that we thought would require human consciousness now by cheating, like facial recognition. Okay, no one can explain how to recognize faces. We do it, but no one can write down the rules for that. And so, under the old cliche of, well, computers can only do what you tell them to do, it should have been impossible to program a computer to recognize faces, and yet it's not. They can do it better than we can. What if we can extend that over all of the things that we would say are consciousness, the products of that, and then we get something which maybe we say, well, that's not conscious. It doesn't understand things. In other words, we don't know what that means. It doesn't have self-awareness. In other words, we don't know what that means either. But it's doing the same things anyway. A couple of days ago, Tesla had their autonomy day, and one of the serious questions that was raised, or one of the comments from the press was, well, it looks like you're trying to build consciousness into the car with this level of ability.
Oh, really? Okay. And is that a level of so is that because they were looking to somehow have the car make decisions, or was the car trying to do some kind? Was it trying to perform some kind of an action or something? What was that?
Well, it was about the full self-driving capability, and they were showing off a level of that was novel in terms of a car going from point to point along multiple roads without hands on the wheel. And that's something that we look at it and go, well, there's something conscious about that, some level of consciousness. We have no idea what sort of scale that is, but that was the point where that word comes about. And so I came up with a charter last year about the range of threats over time that we should expect from evolving technology, and one of them was a period where the threats are from conscious computing. And someone asked me, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, when software gets advanced enough that you program it by arguing with it, then it's probably more useful to think of it as being conscious.
Oh, right. Okay. So, for instance, the program would give you an answer to a question, and then you would tell, a bit like in the movie where it plays out various different scenarios of one. I think it was the USSR attacking the US, and eventually it couldn't get to a point where there was total annihilation. So it therefore said, basically, that the game has no winner. Is that what you mean?
Yes. Now, anyone in computer science at the moment would say, well, we know we're close to that, and that is true. But I'm trying to think beyond that part to where we are when we do get to that level, because that could require a considerable amount of time to prepare for. We don't want to wait until suddenly that's being developed and then we start considering the philosophical and societal implications. That could well be too late.
So at the next dinner, we've got a conversation around bias, whether or not it is possible to create systems within an organization that are underpinned by machine learning that are unbiased. So they have no bias built into them at all. So for instance, psychometric testing, 1,000 people come forwards, ask the organization for a job. The job sends out a psychometric test and then says these 6 individuals are the people that you should offer an interview to. And whether or not any of the decisions that it made in order to identify those 6 people had bias in it. And if it was programmed by a human, was that bias inevitable, or is it possible to have 0% bias? What would you say is your answer to that?
This is a huge topic in AI and human resources right now. And it really reflects the state of understanding bias within humans and organizations, because the psychometric tools that you're talking about are programmed by data. The algorithms are generally fixed and are evolving, of course, but the way that they work is machine learning that works on large amounts of data that has been gathered about large populations.
Yeah.
And when you don't gather the right data, the bias lives in the data, whether you know that it's there or not. And so it doesn't have to be a conscious decision of whoever put that data in there or whoever created those algorithms for there to be bias in the results. Google, for instance, had this famous incident where their photograph classification algorithm, which would automatically recognize images that people had on their phones and label them, was labeling pictures of black people as gorillas. That was extremely embarrassing. A quick Google search will turn that up. And obviously the people at Google did not have any conscious bias in that respect, but the problem was that their data sets had lots of pictures of white people, but not enough pictures of black people relative to the number of pictures of gorillas. And they didn't realize that. And it's interesting that if you look at the training on cultural sensitivity and microaggressions and ethics and bias that are provided to employees now, to have them detect and realize and avoid unconscious bias, those are exactly the tools that we would apply to making sure that that our data sets didn't have bias that we didn't realize.
Okay, so one of the things, therefore, you're saying is that it will always be the data that dictates whether there's bias or not. And that is going to therefore mean if you want to have a system with 0% bias, the data has got to have 0% bias. And do you think it's possible to have data with 0% bias? Well,
one never knows about numbers like 0 or 100%. But I think that the more important issue that brings up is that in order to get as close as possible to that, because that data is generated by us, because we select that data, then we have to understand ourselves as well as possible. The better that we understand our own biases, our own consciousness, our own thought processes, and know thyself, the better we will do at that. It's not so much of a computer science problem as it's human understanding.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So, okay. So, what I was wanting to go into from that conversation, I guess, is a little bit about whether or not there is room for, I guess people refer to it as a higher power. So if these machines around us and the the artificial intelligence or the machine learning capabilities become so strong that they begin to resemble consciousness, or it's a very blurry line, especially for some people. Let's just say that one computer scientist can tell that this is a machine learning, a result of a machine learning process, and another person who doesn't understand computers sees it as actually a conscious being in their lives. Maybe it's an app on their phone like Alexa, or do you think that there could come a time where people begin to rely upon that as some kind of a higher power or some kind of God in their lives? And what do you think that the consequence of that could be? Do you think that that's a place we could get to?
It's certainly likely. Religions, modern religions, spring up around all kinds of things these days, like Star Wars, and so what they it's not an area that I have much expertise in at the moment. It's also something that's particularly volatile in many areas, particularly the United States, where you've got fundamentalism that would trigger a lot of divisiveness over this. I think we could explore the usefulness of having something that's able to provide a level of reflection to people. I mean, right all the way back to the 70s when the program ELIZA was created, which mimicked a Rogerian psychologist. It would just remember some of the things you typed and then say, "Tell me more about your father," whatever. And the guy Joseph Weizenbaum that created that found that his assistant was talking to it and said, "Could you leave the room, please? I'm having a private conversation." And that people were having some intense, deep conversations with these things, and that this program that he'd written, and that rather shocked him. But that's possible, and we can see that happening now with it, that the successes of ELIZA, and that one of the attributes of that is that they go, it's a machine. It's not judging me for what I'm saying. So it actually has some benefit to them. Would they be better off seeing a psychologist? Probably, but sometimes that's not an option for some people. It's not an easy option.
Okay, so that's quite an interesting point of view. One of the things that we've been processing a lot. We do email marketing in the business that I'm involved with. That's what we do. We do a lot of it, and we're looking at machine learning to see whether or not we can identify the types of companies that will open the emails that we're sending based on the results that we've had from previous campaigns, and time that campaign was opened, the day it was opened, the nature of the campaign, that kind of stuff. But what we've realized is that actually every now and again we have to reset to zero, because we are we're trying to use machine learning to identify very small segments within the database that will open an email based on the last 50 or 60 campaigns. And this audience becomes smaller and smaller, more and more narrow. And at some point we have to reset to zero. Otherwise, we're just constantly targeting these 2,514 people who have behaved in such a way over the last 6 months that they become the prime targets of the system. And if we don't reset to zero, we eventually become 212. And if we still don't, there's only 80 people left out of a list of 700,000 people. So there's got to be some kind of a random something that can take us back to zero.
Right. That's one of the features of machine learning. You have training phase where it learns from a large amount of data, and then it applies itself to that. But it needs a huge amount of data to do that. And the more that it, as you say, that it narrows down what it's applying that to, and the smaller that gets, because you're trying to target increasingly specific populations, then the more you run the risk of it not being able to learn about the environments it's going into. The same thing applies to people as we get older. If we don't pay special attention to how we learn, we go from this mode of, as kids, we were just sopping stuff up and learning, but now we're like, oh yeah, I know all that. I know all that. Don't try to teach me anything new. Now it's my turn to show off and use what I've learned. I already know this stuff, and of course, that eventually becomes a destructive, self-defeating thought pattern. And you're demonstrating it somewhat faster there with a computer.
Okay. So I know that I've run out of time there, so I'm gonna bring. I could spend probably the next couple of hours going through this kind of stuff with you, but I'm sure that you've got better things to do. But what I would like to say is thank you so much for you coming along to our dinner a couple of months ago, and I'm going to invite you into the group, and I'm going to put this this recording into the group as well, so that everybody can see it. Yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to try and define AI for us today, and I hope that you have a lovely day.
Well, thank you, Duncan. I'm looking forward to coming back to the UK and also your group in the near future.
That would be great. You're welcome back anytime, Peter. Thank you.